All right. Well, good evening, everyone. I think most of you have been to this meeting before. This is an annual meeting about rail safety during Southwest Light Rail construction. As you may know, there was a directive from the legislature that this meeting should occur annually while construction is occurring in the corridor. And City of Minneapolis has been asked to host this meeting annually. So I want to thank you once again for being here. Welcome. So just in general, just some quick housekeeping before we get started. Please keep your phone or your computer muted if you're not actively speaking to prevent feedback. You're welcome to have your cameras on or off. And then I know that not everyone's seeing the same thing on Teams, but if you want to get our attention, you can either raise your hand, there are, at the top of many of your screens, you're going to find a reaction option where you can raise your hand to get our virtual attention, or just go off mute and try to get our attention. So. Somehow I just got muted, but I'm back.
If you are not speaking, could you please mute yourself? Thank you.
Yes, we got somebody named A-Rock. We will mute them. I'm muting that person, but you guys can still hear me, right? Okay,
yes,
wonderful.
We can.
Okay, thanks so much. All right, so I know, a long list of people have joined us today online, and I know who I was expecting, and so it's kind of hard for me to track everyone that's here, but I just want to start, obviously Representative Hornstein is here. I just want to acknowledge him, and he is responsible for us holding this meeting, and Senator Dibble, and I don't know if Senator Dibble is here right now, but
He'll be joining a bit late, Lauren.
Okay. Yeah, okay. I thought he would probably be joining. I know that I was expecting that Council Member Palmisano will be here today. So I'm sure she'll jump on soon. Want to acknowledge Council Member, I'm expecting Councilor Goodman to join us as well at some point. And then Chair Zelli sends his regards from the Met Council, but he's out on medical leave. And Margaret Anderson Kelleher, our Public Works Director, also really wanted to be here, but she has a different city obligation tonight. So I just kind of wanted to acknowledge some of those folks who I know really invested in this. And maybe
Lauren,
yeah.
Lauren, I would say the same for Commissioner Green. She has another obligation as well. So Commissioner Green may not make it as well, but she wants folks to know that I'm here. And so I certainly will relay any information onto her. Okay,
thank you for being here. And then I want to thank the many representatives of the neighborhood organizations who are here from Kenwood and Cedar Alstein Neighborhood Association and West Makaska. And I see some of our chairs, Chair Cedarberg and Chair Brown, and I'm sure, and then other leaders from those neighborhoods. So thanks for being here, and thank you, because we always look to you for help as we prepare for this meeting, and we appreciate it. So our agenda again is posted in the chat, and we basically have two presentations for you today. You're going to hear from the project office. And again, this meeting is focused on the nexus to, rail safety during construction. So you're going to have a focused presentation from the project office. And then the next presentation is we're going to hear from Mark Wagner again. Mark Wagner is the president and CEO of Twin Cities and Western Rail Company. And we appreciate that he has been joining us for these meetings. I think is really helpful insights for us. So we're going to hear those two presentations, and then we should have plenty of time for questions and answers. And our fire chief, Brian Tyner, is here, and our director of emergency management, Barrett Lane, is also here and will be available during the question and answer period. So if are there any questions before we get started or any other logistical concerns? All right. I'm going to turn it over to Jim Alexander, the project director for the Southwest Light Rail Project Office.
All right. Thank you, Lauren. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, good. Thank you. So I have a short PowerPoint to go through, and we can run through that, and any questions as we go, feel free to speak up. If someone could just kind of watch the chat, I'll call it out, and we'll see what we can respond. I've got several folks from the project office here with us to help with Q&A, and Dale Even is with the contractor, London McCrossan, joint venture, the civil construction contractor for the project. Hopefully I'm sharing my screen with everyone. Can everybody see Minneapolis Rail Safety Meeting?
We can see that, Jim. And can I just make a note for everyone that I'd like to wait for all the Q&A until both presentations are done. So if you do put something in the chat, know that it's not going to get an answer right now anyway. So if you can kind of hold on, because we can't be interacting with that at the same time. So thank you very much.
All right, so just a couple of slides. I know y'all don't want to hear about the overall project so much, but we do have a couple of slides just to remind you that we have this is an extension of the Green Line that runs from St. Paul to Minneapolis and heads out to Eden Prairie, 16 new stations, and well, lots of connections between bus and rail once we're complete. This is the scope of the civil construction. Focus here is really on the freight rail piece. And freight rail, actually, we are in kind of a shared corridor, if you will, for about almost 8 miles of the project. Essentially, get my hand here, from about 169 all the way up to just short of the Royalston.
Jim, we lost your audio.
Jim, I think you muted yourself accidentally.
I hit the wrong button. Sorry about that. Okay, so I'll repeat what I just said, unless you can read my lips there. But we have freight rail. We're sharing with freight rail for about 8 miles from roughly 169 here, all the way through Hopkins, St. Louis Park, and into Minneapolis. And we get out of the freight corridor just short of Royalston Avenue here, and give you an idea of where we're at there. All right, I have issues with keeping myself going here. Okay, so we showed this last time. Actually, it's kind of an update as we talk annually on this, and this is really what's left to do on work in the gold there. In the green, we essentially have finished the freight rail work. We don't show it all the way over on the upper left, but we also have the BNSF track finished up on that end as well. And so the gold is really the area where we're going to be shifting the track back into its original location once the tunnel is constructed. And I was looking at my notes previously, and it was a question for some folks at Cedar Lake Parkway. We currently have that closed, and we are going to have to shift that just a little bit from where it is right now to get it into its final condition. Again, we're looking to put it back to where it was before we started excavation of the tunnel, and we had to move the freight track over to the west just a tad bit to accommodate the tunnel construction. So that'll be down the road a piece when we get to that. So some of these slides are similar for what we showed last year, but I really wanted to focus on the freight rail monitoring and maintenance. And we'll talk about a few things, some things that came out of the Q&A that I want to highlight here. But this is a tamper machine. The contractor is responsible for maintaining this track, and so we work closely with Mark Wagner and his folks as we keep this track up to speed as we proceed with construction. And we have a lot of monitoring out there. I think maybe just go to one of those slides. Here's some observation. We have inspection. Kind of person walks up. I think this is every couple of days that happens. Up to the right are what are called telltales, and I'll get into that in a little bit. Where we're excavating down below the groundwater table, which keep in mind the excavation extends about 40 feet down below the ground surface, and we reach groundwater approximately 20 feet from the ground surface, and so we have these what we call telltales, are essentially a tube that goes into the ground down to about where the groundwater level is, and we have rebar in there. So we are going to monitor that in case we have any ground movement, because we did have a condition early this year, early in January, where we had some soil that came into the excavation and we had ground loss under the railroad tracks. Luckily, we were able to get that addressed before any trains come through. We do work closely with Mark's flaggers who are out on site, and we were able to remedy that. But what the challenge is during winter, the ground will freeze down to the 5-6 feet down below the ground, and that could have a tendency to bridge over ground that is not frozen. And so these are intended to monitor if there's any ground loss. We're also, you've heard us talk, and some of you heard us talk in the past, where we have divers in the water, and they actually go into the water and check the condition of the sheet piles, which you see kind of off to the right on that rightmost image. And they're checking the integrity of the sheets to make sure we don't have any gaps, because what happened in January is we did have a gap and we lost ground, and it propagated all out through the ground surface, and so we had to fill that back up and make sure that was good condition before we ran trains over that area. So this is just some of the monitoring. We have this little white bulb here. This is something new that we've implemented. It's a Sensieve sensor. This is we feel like this is a better monitoring device, particularly with the snowy environment we're now in. It's an automatic device. I think we get a reading about every 5 minutes automatically on this. It's essentially situated on the ties. As we're proceeding with the excavation, particularly as it gets down below the groundwater, we want to keep a very close eye on what the track is doing or not doing, and these devices help us with that. So that's the image up on the left. On the right is is called a total station. It's an automatic survey device that checks various equipment on there, or monitors on the tracks. As elsewhere, we have them on the Cedar Isles building, for example, and but that's an automated device as well. So we keep a sharp eye on any movement, and we have a pretty tight tolerance on any movement. If we have movement over an inch, up to an inch, we stop and we investigate, and flaggers are alerted. We don't let the trains go through the flagging and the dispatch that Mark has, to make sure that we don't have an issue. Just hopefully all you're aware of this temporary freight rail crossing. This is the PED crossing, because we have committed to keeping access through the Cedar Lake Parkway area, as it's been closed down since May of this year. And this is a temporary condition, and we do ask for the bicyclists to dismount. I'll detest that I don't see very many dismounting. You see me going through there, I dismount. So even if it's the middle of the night, when I'm coming home from work, I'm still getting off. But we're trying to function that as best as possible. We have flashing lights on the stop signs to alert folks that there's a track coming through here, and freight at times at various times of the day. This will be shifting over to a new location. That was essentially phase 2 of our evolution of this of detour, and you can see in the yellow dash is where the new crossing will be. So what we'll do is we'll get that. We got to get a bridge built over the tunnel construction and get that all detailed. And maybe if you've been out there, you've seen some pavement that's already been laid down. We'll get that all squared away. Once that's in place, then we'll take out that existing temporary bridge, and this will be the avenue for peds and bikes to make their way through. So I know we get a lot of questions about when Cedar Lake Parkway can open. We still see the spring. We feel like we're on target to make that. But as we tell you, it's all weather dependent and other events that may come our way. So we're keeping an eye on that. We watch the schedule on a regular basis and keep track with the contractor. So this is kind of where we're at with that guy. But eventually we will get the permanent crossing back in place on Cedar Lake Parkway. So talked about this a little bit last year. There's I think there are questions resolving around, well, what happens when something happens? And it really comes down to, is it an emergency situation, somebody severely injured, or something where you have to have a 911 incident? Well, that observing staff, they're instructed to call 911 right away. But then there's a series of conversations that are being had as well, and this is just kind of the transfer of communication as issues happen. So you can see that observing staff that's on there, these folks are trained to report things accordingly. And so if it's not an emergency situation, it would go down through the contractor supervisor. This would go down to our essentially our field engineer and over to TC&W flaggers who are on site as well. And that goes to the dispatch. But we also goes over to the contractors, project management. So Dale even gets a word on it, and then I've ultimately, Mark, you hear about things as well as things come through. But we also transfer information to the city public works staff. We work very closely with Rick Kreuzer and Brian Dawes' folks and Paul Miller, and that gets transferred to city traffic police, whatever the case may be. That those folks are notified, and it also heads down to our leadership. So ultimately, it heads my way, and we also get outreach. So David Davies is aware of it as well, so we can start communicating that out depending on what the situation is.
Hey Jim,
yes.
I'm not gonna interrupt you for all the questions, but just one question someone had is what is SWLRT car?
Yeah, that's our council's authorized representative. I call it the field engineer. It's that's just our contractual term that we use. It gets a little confusing, but when we have contracts with contractors, we have a representative, and that's called the council's authorized representative. Nothing too fancy about that, really. But all right. So construction safety, we do take this very seriously. Both us and the contractor, we work in concert with each other, and we have a lot of folks out there watching us. OSHA is out there, FRA is out there. We don't necessarily see them all the time, but we know they're watching. That's just a common deal that they do. If there's an issue, then they will get involved in OSHA as well. And so, they can do announced, unannounced, and we do work in concert with OSHA and FRA as needed. We also regularly report any issues to FTA. We continue to have regular meetings with them, and if something's serious, I will be reaching out to Region 5, which is out of Chicago, that covers this area. This isn't really freight rail safety, but there was a question related to environmental concerns, and I bet there's probably follow-up questions maybe from you, Mary, on this. But construction impacts for the tunnel construction have been accounted for in the final environmental impact statement. We are acknowledging that we are running longer, and I think that's pretty obvious. But the work is pretty much the same. We have added the secant work, but in terms of amount of concrete, that's maybe 5-6% more concrete that we originally anticipated. But we continue to be sure the contractor is following the protocol in terms of keeping dust at a minimum, and through watering and with the concrete sawing. And we, the project is essentially, it's been defined. We haven't really changed that. And there might be been some questions about the blue water. We have We have cells that we're constructing the tunnel in, and once the concrete is placed underwater, we essentially place this concrete tremmy, we call it. That's the first concrete gets put into place after we're down to that 40-foot excavation. After the concrete is placed, the water turns blue from brown, and that's just a chemical reaction from the materials in the concrete. We do discharge all of that to the Met Council's sewer, and that goes through the wastewater treatment process. So as I indicated, fairly short PowerPoint. Lauren, I don't know if you want to take questions now or go to Mark, or.
I'd really like us to hear from Mark. I make exceptions for state legislators, so we can take a question from Frank.
No, I don't need an exception. If you want to go to Mark, that's fine. I can hold my question.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Representative. We'll be getting to questions pretty soon. And then I realized too that since I know so many of you, I didn't introduce myself. So I'm Lauren Olson. I'm a senior government relations representative with the City of Minneapolis with the Government Relations Department. And I have been asked to facilitate tonight's meeting. So I'll just do that. And then turn it over again. Once again, Mark Wagner is the president and CEO of Twin Cities and Western Railroad Company. And I'm going to turn it over to him now. Thanks.
Very good. Thank you all for having me here. We try to be good neighbors to the best we can. One thing that has come up over the course of the last year is a number of folks calling in saying, hey, your trains are going faster than 10 miles an hour. And what we do is every locomotive has a download device. We download it and then we measure it, and every one of them was 10 miles an hour or less. So what I tried to do is I tried to come up with a way where you can feel comfortable. So when a thunderstorm happens, lightning hits, and you count 1 1,000, 2 1,000, 3 1,000. Every 5 1,000s, it's a mile away or more. So if you take 10 miles an hour, and you go 1 mile is 5,280 feet, then that would mean 10 miles is 52,800 feet per hour at 10 miles an hour. So if you take 52,800 feet divided by 60 minutes, that means it's going 880 feet per minute at 10 miles an hour. Well, you take the 880 feet and divide that by 60 seconds, and now it's going 14 2/3 feet per second. So in essence, if you're watching the train and you go 1 1,000, that wheel will have traveled 14, almost 15 feet. And so that might be some kind of comfort for those of you who feel that. I mean, it's weird, but I mean, the trains are so big that they look like they're going faster than they are. But I think that's the simplest way to do it, is to, count 1 1,000, and if that wheel should have moved no more than 15 feet, 14 2/3 the feet to be exact, then it's at 10 miles an hour. And if it's moving less than 14 2/3 feet per second, we're going slower than 10 miles an hour. The other thing is the locomotives have foot counters in them, and the engineers and the conductors know how long their train is. So when the front of that train hits the junction with BNSF on the northeast end of the corridor, they start their counter, and then it counts the feet as the train's going eastbound. And when the rear of the train hits the BNSF, then they know they can increase the speed. And the reverse is true going west. It's 10 miles an hour through the corridor, but once we hit the St. Louis Park border, the speed goes up to 25. But again, they'll wait until the rear of the train has passed that point, and they'll press that counter again. So those are some of the things that we do to watch the speed of the trains. And believe me, all 29 of our train people and supervisors and managers, everybody knows 10 miles an hour is an uber sensitive issue with this neighborhood. And so we don't have rogue engineers and rogue conductors. And so, like I said, every time it's been asked, we've measured it, and it comes back as 10 miles an hour or less as measured by the event recorder. So I wanted to make sure I got that out up front. And again, that 1 second count might, provide some kind of comfort. Second thing I will note is that you may have noticed an increase in the number of trains this past year. And if you did, it's true. What happened is, so the part of Minnesota that we serve is largely corn and soybean country. And so the corn typically is consumed in state by ethanol plants, by livestock feeders, and what's left over is then available for export. So in market year 2020, 2021, which means the harvest of 2020 through right before the harvest of 2021, the market for Minnesota corn was the Pacific Northwest, Seattle, Tacoma. And so what that means is that of the 120 corn trains that traversed, roughly half of them went west and you never saw them, and the other half went east and then to go west. It depends on where. We have 5 unit loaders of corn and soybeans on the Twin City and Western from Appleton all the way into Brownton. Anyway, what happened this past market year, fall of 2021 through September of 2022, is they had a drought up in Canada. And so they couldn't feed their cattle. The barley crop was shot. And so they reached out to Canadian Pacific origins, including all the way down to our central Minnesota origins. And we did over 100 trains that all went through the corridor to interchange with Canadian Pacific in North Minneapolis, and then they ran them up to Canada. This year, the Canadian, they did not have a drought. They had a rather robust crop, so that market isn't there anymore. However, in the United States, there's been a drought in Kansas, Nebraska, Oklahoma, Texas. And so we are seeing an emerging market for Minnesota corn that now wants to go there. So we will bring it through the corridor, hand it off to the Union Pacific in St. Paul. In fact, one, you might have noticed one went through tonight. If it hasn't gone through already, it's going to. That's a full loaded of corn. I think that corn is going to Texas. So that's the why of what you're seeing. And in Minnesota, we're the furthest away from the Pacific Ocean, the Gulf of Mexico. And so what that means is it can go anywhere. And the Twin City and Western connect with BNSF, Union Pacific, Canadian Pacific. And so our farmers have options on our rail line, and they take advantage of it. As far as hazmat training goes, so as you know, we haul ethanol. And the legislature in the mid 2010s passed legislation obligating rail companies that haul more than 20 cars of hazardous commodity must go through prescribed drills, have prescribed response plans, etc. And so in August of 2021, TC&W had its full-blown ethanol derailment drill. It occurred out in Brownton, Minnesota, because Buffalo Creek goes through Brownton, and we wanted to do the derailment drill as if there was a breach of the ethanol and it actually was migrating towards that creek. And so we have contractors with booms, we got contractors with cranes, we got emergency response people, we had the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency was there. So they did the water containment, the emergency responders, police, fire, sheriff, ambulance, and then the command center setup. And then they went through this whole drill during the morning into the early afternoon, and then the drill was completed. But then there was a point by point analysis of every aspect of that drill. And so we are committed to being fully prepared should anything happen. We certainly do all we can to prevent anything from that happening, but rest assured, we go through these drills so that everybody knows who does what the roles and responsibilities are, and if any hiccups come into the drill, then we alleviate them, and that continues. One of the questions that a resident asked was, this is a different issue now, is TC&W received a $1 million federal grant for positive train control. What did you do with that? Well, first of all, positive train control is it's a means for a satellite to stop the train if the train crew is either speeding or they go through the equivalent of a red light. It'll stop the train. It will override the engineer. Congress mandated that system, United States Congress mandated that system in 2008. The trouble was the technology didn't exist. And so the first 4 years, the large railroads, there are 4 now in the United States, got together along with the Canadian railroads and came up with a protocol that would work no matter where you were in the United States for this positive train control. But they didn't develop that until 2014. As part of the federal law, the federal regulator, Federal Railroad Administration, delegated the authority to either make a short line like us or not accept a short line like us from having to do PTC. And since BNSF is the host railroad that TC&W operates over once it gets into Minneapolis, BNSF told us back in 2014, we're not going to carve you out, you must get PTC. And through we were fortunate in 2015, and I will give Senator Franken a high five on this one because they went over the finish line. It was $1.5 million endeavor. And, we don't have like $1.5 million laying around, much less for something that, really isn't giving us any benefit. But nonetheless, they were able to do that. And we worked with the Federal Railroad Administration. But the other complication was there's only one vendor for the radios that go on the locomotives. And it happens to be owned by the large railroads. And there's only one vendor for the onboard the locomotive software. And then the third element is what's called the back office, which is how the locomotive communicates to the TC&W, who communicates to the BNSF, who communicates back to TC&W, communicates back to the locomotive. That also is controlled by one vendor. So there were very difficult one-sided issues during the next 6 years. But in the summer of 2020, TC&W is fully, the terminology is, we're full revenue service demonstration achieved for PTC. So every train that you see coming through your corridor going into Minneapolis or from Minneapolis has got positive train control on it. And I think, well, I'll leave with one final note. I know we've had a couple incidents over the course of the year where I will call we haven't had a train sitting at the light excessive periods of time. We don't like waiting there any more than you like watching us wait there. And the time in early May, that went all the way up to not only Representative Hornstein, but also to the governor's office and everybody in between. I have to be at a railroad conference in St. Louis when that happened. And so it was an issue of the Canadian Pacific up in North Minneapolis telling us at 2 in the morning, yeah, we can take you. And then we get to there and the next person there said, no, we can't take you until, 9 o'clock in the morning. Well, a crew only has 12 hours to be there. So when they run out of their 12 hours, they secure the train. So trains, somebody referred to it as abandoned. It wasn't abandoned. It was secured. All the handbrakes are tied, the doors are locked, all that kind of stuff, until the next rested crew could come on and then wait for the CP to take us. Hopefully those are one-offs. It did make it to Canadian Pacific's Washington, D.C. government affairs person, and so and up to Calgary. So we took it seriously, they took it seriously. So we're hopeful that we don't see those events. We're at the mercy of our large railroads. When they tell us, when we're in Glencoe heading east and they say, we can take you, we believe them. So when we get there, we expect to be able to proceed. But sometimes things happen. So I thought I'd just mention that. And that's pretty much all I wanted to point out. So I welcome questions or comments.
All right, well, thank you very much, Mark. So I think what we're going to do is we'll turn over to Representative Hornstein, and then I'll go to Laura next to at least ask a couple of her questions, and then we'll toggle around. Representative Hornstein?
Thank you very much. I appreciate everybody's presentations and contributions. And again, not directly related to rail safety, but I have a question for Mr. Alexander. I'm now a Sydney resident and live about a quarter mile from the pinch point. And so I'm, walk past that, and I'm sure there's a technical name for it, Mr. Alexander, but there's a very large vertical yellow machine that, appears to be digging, and it makes quite a bit of noise every day. And I'm kind of wondering, how long, residents will be experiencing that. What exactly is that machine doing? I know it has something to do with the tunnel and pumping
Sure.
things perhaps, but if you could go over that. And that does interact very closely to the rail line as well.
Sure, Representative. I think what you're talking about is the teledipper, if I'm not mistaken. Essentially, it's a device that has kind of a clamshell on the end of it. And so it goes down and digs out the soil and brings it up and puts it on a conveyor that gets sent further to the north or east, and then it's removed from the site. So that's its primary purpose, to dig and remove soil. And unfortunately, we'll have to keep using that device as we're progressing with the tunnel, because just the logistics of getting in there with all the struts, those horizontal members that go across and in between the sheets to hold the sheets back. We need to use that equipment to excavate. And I would just acknowledge that once we get CCANT work done on the other end, we'll have a similar operation going to the west. So apologize for the noise. It just that's just a function of that's what we've got to use to excavate.
So just one quick thing, if that's okay, Lauren, by way of follow-up. So that particular equipment will be pretty much through the duration of the project construction? Well,
through the duration of excavation. Mm-hmm. So it's not needed for putting the concrete in or anything like that, but it's for digging the soil. And again, we're digging 40 feet down into the ground, and so quite a bit of soil needs to be removed to get a space for the tunnel to be placed.
So is this like a year or two then, or what are we talking about?
Well, we project. I don't know, Andy or Nick, you could help me out with specifics on when we currently think we're going to be done, but we're certainly into 23 and 24 for excavation.
Thank you.
Jeremy, I do see that your hand's up. I was going to go to a couple other people who are in queue, though.
Okay, I just wanted to mention there are other yellow machines there that they might be talking about, which are those heaters that are heating water and pumping them through blankets to keep the soil thawed. And those are 24-hour-a-day noise.
Yeah. I would argue from the middle of the corridor, the noise has subsided significantly than it was over the last 2 years. I think the majority of folks that have been along the corridor are used now to the hum and drum of the daily, but it does seem like at least from a vibratory and noise pollution perspective, it's far subsided than it was a year ago even. So maybe that's just all a sad state that we're all just kind of conditioned to it, but it is kind of just humming.
Jim, did you want to say anything else on that before we go to other questions?
No, I don't think so. Yeah, Laura, it's just, we really haven't done a lot of changes. Early on, they had some modifications about how they're trucking it out, and tried a couple of things. That's conveyor. And, I think the contractor's in kind of that mode beyond the bell curve or the learning curve to get up, and we're just kind of doing our thing now. And
yep. I just have a couple of comments, and then Mary, I see you have your hand up. Mark, thank you always for being here. I really appreciate it. You've been very responsive, and I would say again, from the middle of the corridor perspective, it does seem like the trains are moving in realm of the speed limit. It does seem like there are a couple of times a week where in the middle of the night trains again, but that are going maybe a little fast, but those are the ones that we're not counting, but we've gotten into, Jeremy has taught us well to count for the trains. And so we're trying to do that. It does seem like there's maybe a couple instances a week where we're trucking a little fast and the brakes are going when they hit the S curve on the Midtown Greenway. But overall, thank you for what you're doing. And thank you for confirming that there are more trains than we were seeing, because we were all kind of questioning that, and that makes good sense with where the market's at. I just had a couple of broader questions, not necessarily so much safety, but just what the holiday construction schedule looks like for folks in the neighborhood that are planning holiday activities and stuff. If there is any, downtime in the last couple of weeks of the year, or what that schedule looks like. And then broadly, if there's an update on what the situation with Sika is, and what the building looks like, and any reinforcement. I know we have Sika residents on the call here tonight too, so just hoping folks can comment on both of those items.
Sure, I'll take, why don't I handle the Sika first? So I, just out of respect to the Sika residents, we are working with the coordination group on that. We're going through a mediation process, but we are addressing the issues that occurred earlier this year. And I just don't want to relay a lot just out of sensitivity because there's people's homes, but we are working closely with folks at Sika to address the issues. And in terms of construction schedule, unfortunately, we're going to try to be working as much as possible. Maybe Andy or Dale, you guys can speak to what's going to happen around the Christmas holiday and New Year's holiday. But I think things are going to slow down as we've started to experience the cold weather, so things aren't moving as rapidly because fingers get a little stiff out there and be able to do the work. But Dale, I wonder if you could just speak to how you're going to kind of work through the holidays here.
Yeah, Jim, it's our intent to continue to work through the holidays on the Kenilworth corridor. Now there'll be some less critical activities further east of that we may not pursue, and part of that could be driven by the weather. But we will be taking off. It's an observed holiday for both Christmas and New Year's, and we're observing those holidays on the following Monday of each of those weeks. It would be our intent to be working down there.
Thank you.
So Laura, if I may, I saw you had another, well, I guess Claire had a question. Maybe I go ahead and address this about the flagging. We are committed to continue to work with Mark and his team on flagging. I think we've discussed the challenges we had early on in the project, and hopefully that's way back in the rearview mirror. But we're continuing to have a good relationship with Mark's group. At least that's what I'd say. Hopefully, Mark, you concur. But we have a good relationship with the flaggers out there. Everybody's working in concert with each other. As to the cost, I really can't talk to that right at the moment. I don't know if I can validate the $7 million figure just off the cuff. I'd have to check into. But there's obviously going to be more costs. You've seen us out there in the arena talking about needing additional monies for this project, and more time just causes more money needs. So this is an important function. We cannot move ahead without the flagging, and we will not move ahead without TC&W at our side as we work through all this.
All right, I'm just going to pause this for 1 second. So Mary, I do see you have your hand up, and I've made note of that. It was my intention to go to Claire, but Jim, you answered one of Claire's questions. I do think it will help everybody if we allow the person to either raise their question or we read it so we all know what the question is. I will say, Claire, would you like to ask another one of your questions? If that's not possible, I can refer to the chat in just a minute, but for now, I'm gonna, I hear.
I think generally they're covered up to this point. I was just weighing in on the noise factor. I'm not right in the corridor, and I hate to be a complainer. I try to be more on the safety front and bring what knowledge I have. But I got to say, with my windows closed at nighttime, I can hear it. And I know there's nothing to be done. But it's something that you guys need to hold account for, because you told us we weren't going to be impacted in significant ways, and yet we are. And I don't know that when we're out of construction that we're going to have much improvement, because pumping noises and vibratory equipment will continue. So I guess I'm just putting a bit of a flag in the sand, and but certainly my woes are nothing compared to those who have to live in the corridor through this imperfect process.
Thank you, Claire. So next I'm going to turn it to Mary, and then I'll go to Mark Nichols, and then I'll check to see if Jeremy was wanting to share anything that's been shared in the chat. So we'll turn over to Mary.
Thank you, Lauren. I have two questions, and I'll just ask them together. What is the incident rate, the safety incident rate? I know I asked this question last year, and Jim, you said that it had been reduced from the previous year, and that was because the foreman was starting to meet with the workers every morning, and that helped to cut down on safety incidents. And my second question, as you predicted, I'm going to follow up on that environmental question that I submitted.
Okay, so maybe I'll address the safety incident. So just to get everybody up to speed, there's a total case incident rate, and this is something the Met Council is tracking for the civil construction. We also track it for other construction contracts, but we'll talk just strictly to civil here, which we have done in the past. And this is where when there's a recordable incident where someone is injured and they seek medical treatment. So maybe, for example, I'll give you, if someone were to step on a rock and kind of twist their ankle, but they decide to work through it, they go home, they come back to work the next day, that's not really recordable. But if they had to go seek medical treatment or something like that, that would be a recordable incident. So and just kind of bring you up to speed, since we've been doing this a number of years, back in August of 2020, that factor was 4.6. We reported back in July of 21 of 4.4, and as of the end of October of this year, we're at 3.86. So it is dropping. We have Dale even here. There's a question, I think, related to what the contractor is doing. Dale, maybe if you could just kind of speak, because I think it's more than just a couple of individuals, really a team effort to really kind of keep a handle on the safety piece.
Yeah, no, I think we spoke about this last year, and what we tried to ramp up our efforts out on the job site with getting the management more involved at the start of the workday, every workday, which each one of the crews place more emphasis on the safety aspects of our daily huddles. Every one of our crews is doing a huddle. They discuss safety topics for the day, what hazards they might encounter during that day, and how they're going to be mitigated. So, but we have increased those efforts, and then along with not only pushing to increase those efforts, we've pretty stringent monitoring plan to see how it's going, and we are getting more participation out there, holding people accountable for attending these things, and it seems to be paying off.
So could I ask, what does that 3.86 mean? Is that a rate or a number of accidents, or what?
It's a number of recordable incidents against the number of worker hours, and that's essentially from the beginning of the civil construction work till, like, this last number I gave you, the 3.86 is through the end of October.
So that's 3.86 incidents over the total number of hours, but it's not the number of incidents.
No, we haven't been really reporting that to you. We've just been talking about the rate. Again, it's the number of recordables over the number of hours. I don't have those figures handy.
So could you maybe ballpark how many in numbers, how many does that actually amount to? Like 5 or 10 or 100 or what?
I would not want to ballpark a number until I could certainly follow up with values. I don't want to throw out a number because I don't have that.
Okay, could you do that for us, please?
We certainly can.
Thank you. So I want to go to my second question now.
I'll allow it, but
sorry.
We'll try to have everyone just do one, but yes, go ahead. I'll let you.
Okay. So the project, as we know, has been extended 4 years. And Mark, you indicated that there were environmental effects of construction assessed in the FEIS, but they were not the environmental effects of an additional 4 years. And so meanwhile, we have heavy machinery that's spewing pollutants and using probably polluting chemicals, oil, or whatever. I don't even know what they all might be. We've got cars that are taking detours, adding thousands, probably hundreds of more miles every single day, and that'll go on for 4 years. We've got the manufacture of concrete, which is hugely polluting, and off-gassing of concrete. All of this has been increased by another 4 years worth. So we really don't know anymore what the environmental effects of this project are. That's a problem. I mean, it goes to the question of why do you do an environmental impact statement? And if it's over for 4 years, we don't know anymore.
Well, I would maybe acknowledge there's extended time for extended fuel for the equipment running. I would say we're producing the same amount of concrete, roughly. I did speak to the, we do have additional concrete from the secant, but we're essentially talking about the same project as far as the tunnel, what we originally had disclosed. I don't know, Mary, I can't really speak to the additional time there. We didn't evaluate that. That wasn't part of the scope of the FEIS, and we don't have any direction to look at that from an environmental perspective. We are working closely with the FTA. We report them to them on this project on a regular basis, and we don't have. They haven't raised an issue. So
I would also add, just Mary, on that, on the the additional traffic and idling gas usage, like living on Burnham Road where that detour is, like it's just about par. Like I don't think we have an increase in traffic, and I would also argue that those that live on Burnham that have the ability to go a two-way on a Burnham Road are using less fuel to return as opposed to sitting on Dean Parkway in traffic where we've been. So I don't know that that's a fair assessment on the traffic.
So what we do know is that the project has been extended for 4 years, and that the environmental impacts that were assessed over the original amount of time are no longer accurate. That has to be a fact.
I would disagree with that.
It doesn't seem like there'll be agreement right now on that.
Okay.
We do have plenty of time left during this Q&A period. So the good thing is I think, we'll be able to circle back to lots of people, but I do want to get to some people who are in queue to see if they want to ask their question. So again, Mark Nichols had put a comment in the chat. Mark, did you want to say something about your comment?
Yes, I would, please.
Okay.
At the time of the last safety meeting, I asked a question about the safety system in use, the safety management system. And I was told that that discussion would need to be taken offline. And I worked with David Davies, or attempted to get some additional information. I had a number of questions that I posed, and I found that I got essentially no answers to those questions, in the sense that I know that the FTA requires a system safety plan to be developed for a project of this size. I saw the Seattle plan for their light rail, but I was denied any access to the safety plan for the Southwest Light Rail project. And I was told that I would get no help from anyone in finding which documents were actually there if I requested them. Further, I was told that it would be likely that I would see heavy redactions. And my understanding is that David had talked with someone in the legal department, and they said, this is a security risk, and therefore you are not entitled to see any information of that nature. If this is an open interchange of information between the government and the citizens, that seems in direct contradiction. I've got some additional specifics that I had asked about, in addition to the compliance with the FTA standard, which is reference to an AON risk management audit and what the results of that were and when that was conducted. If there's a use of explosives on any aspect of the project, if there are any commodity flow studies that are available that would indicate the volume and type of hazardous materials passing through the corridor during construction and after construction. And if there is a plan with any specificity as far as evacuation or shelter in place in the event there's a hazardous material release, a derailment, or some other type of emergency that took place in the corridor during the course of construction or after. And then what details are available in terms of insurance and risk management that would protect the citizen in the event of some unfortunate event and the storm of lawsuits that would likely result from that. So that's my assessment of what was provided and my understanding of why the safety dialogue annually is conducted is to address such matters. Am I incorrect?
Well, Mark, you got a lot there. Maybe I'll try to start where you started. You mentioned that there was a Seattle document that you have in possession.
Yes.
I'd be curious to know what that is. We have many things. We have a design criteria that we use as we develop these projects. This is something that's carried on from the blue line to the green line to this project. Future projects will use that as it evolves. We have a safety and security management plan that we have with the FTA that describes how we go about our management of safety and security issues as we go through design into construction up through the point where we're handing it off to our operations folks. Then operations has their own safety management. I don't know. I'm not sure who y'all talked to. I have touched base with David Davies. I'll just be put out. We are sensitive to information just free flowing out there. Maybe we can find a happy medium so we don't have to have a heavily redacted document. But in the past, I'll just be honest. Sometimes we weren't quite clear what you're asking for because you're speaking sometimes a little bit different language than we speak, and maybe that's just a problem that we need to kind of figure out how to get through.
I think
maybe I'll just
English.
offer, if I could, Mark, if I could just offer, maybe we could try to take another bat at this and see if we can meet your needs. I don't want to be resistant and saying we can't share stuff. I've got to be sensitive to what might be security related. But I'm open. David was trying to manage the system or the questions with you, and perhaps we need to get some other folks involved that have a little more background in the specific area that you're looking at.
I'd like to speak up at this point because as a resident of Sidna, I've been asking for similar information for years ahead of Mark's participation. And Mark comes to this as a professional in the field. And I come to this as a layperson who has learned more than I ever bloody wanted to about this stuff. And the fact that we are still dancing around the question, slinging lingo, I don't speak your language kind of business is not acceptable. And part of the origin of this question came from the fact we were seeing so many safety incidents on the university line after it was completed. And we wanted to understand how that was being addressed and translated to this project so we did not see repeat issues. And on top of that, the audit that's being done includes a safety component. And I trust that you are fully cooperating on that front and that those questions are being asked. And I think it's quite obvious that my ire is raised. This is at least the third or fourth year that we've danced around this very straightforward question. And this is not rocket science. This is a matter of you telling us which program protocols you selected to design the operations and construction of this project, and whether or not those selections are out of date, And part of this is probably why we've got cost overruns on these projects, because appropriate selections are not made on the front end, and so costs are understated, and we pay for them on the back end. And yes, I would fully like you to follow up thoroughly. And even if it's redacted, because I would like to be able to put that before people, your redacted response.
And I would just build on that, Claire. On behalf of Cigna, we've made the request before for the last at least 3 or 4 years. Like, we would like to see an evacuation drill on the line for this corridor. And Mark, I appreciate your comments earlier about there was a drill done in greater Minnesota, but the reality is it's a highly densely populated neighborhood, and that we need, with limited evacuation routes, we currently have a chokehold in terms of the Cedar Lake Parkway closure, and that, you know, even any elevated risk of extreme elevated freight traffic and speed really puts us at risk. And especially knowing that ethanol jumps on water, we are in a very volatile spot. And we met last year with the city emergency planner person who was lovely, but lives in Hugo, and was clear in her meeting, had never been in this neighborhood, had never walked the site, had never understood the density of it, and said, oh, and like her line in our first meeting was like, oh, I could see why you'd be concerned about this. And so we continue to just have these ongoing concerns. We'd like to, with our new fire chief, and with all parties involved, really like to see an evacuation drill exercised here. It's for the betterment of our community and for those that are going to ride the rail in the future. But to Claire's point, you know, there are incidents along University Line. We're not in a place where it's going to be person versus train or vehicle versus train. We're really looking at like train versus train incidents here, which could be more explosive and endangering than what we're seeing on the University Line. So, you know,
I'd like to pause here, you guys. I've got a list of people still that I'm going to go to. We've started to bounce to some different topics now. You know, really important and good questions. It's just that I'm not sure, it's a little bit harder to follow. So if we can just kind of go back to allowing some kind of order to discussion. So regarding
Lauren,
Claire, Mark,
I would just say, because the purpose of this is a rail safety meeting.
Yeah.
Like, based on Claire's comment, Cigna would reiterate our request for, and I hope Mark Brown and others along the corridor would join us. It is in the interest of the entire corridor and adjacent communities to hold a evacuation drill to better understand what would happen.
Cedarburg, I'll allow response. You know, I want to discuss your question and that topic. So I'm going to say, let's make sure we've addressed Claire and Mark. We will then allow Jim or whomever to address your comment, Laura. And then I'm going to get back to the people who I have in queue, including A-Rock and Mark Brown. So first of all, Jim, on some of the questions that you've offered to take a second stab at some of those questions. I think there's obviously a lot of interest from everybody here in what you would do there. So do you think you could share that on the website where we've published other information, your responses to Mark's questions?
I would suggest that if Mark is willing, I would be happy to sit down with him to talk about what you're looking for and see if we can satisfy that. I'm open to do that.
I'd appreciate that. Thank you.
I just like to keep it cordial.
Well, yeah, I agree, and I apologize if my emotions got a little bit high there, but I think there's a reason for that, and I think that it would be helpful to have a chance to talk with you one-on-one or additional people involved as you might feel is appropriate. And I would like to make sure that if Claire wanted to and others wanted to join that discussion, I would like to have that happen also.
Yeah, I'll be happy to do it. Again, I'd like to keep it a cordial conversation. I'm going to be a professional, and I hope that whoever is at the table would act that way as well. We'll try to get the information to you is what you're looking for. Honestly, it's been David's trying to do his best, and we're doing a lot of stuff, and we can't get everybody all the time. And I was occupied with other matters, and David was keeping me aware, and I don't want to put David on the spot. He doesn't have all the background, all the stuff. He's not necessarily involved in all the plans we have submitted. But let's see if we can get to a spot where we can get your questions answered. So
all right.
maybe David can kind of work with you to figure out a time.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Everybody. So I would like to, I think we should maybe address the question or comment from Chair Cedarberg about evacuation. And then I do have a number of people have great questions I want to get to. So Jim, did you want to respond perhaps? And I don't know if others want to weigh in on the comment about evacuation planning.
Well, I think that's, I'd like to maybe see what the city might have to offer in that front. We could certainly participate in something, but I think it's, it'd be a kind of a collaborative effort here. I'd be curious to see what the city has to say about that.
Yeah, I don't know, Chief Tyner or Director Lane, did you have a comment right now on that topic?
Okay, here we go. All right. No, not much. I'd be happy to coordinate something with you and to see if we can, meet everybody's needs. So
We could reignite that conversation again or take a fresh look at that. I know it's come up before. We could try to take a fresh look at it. And then A. Rock had a comment and question. I wonder, did you want to share your question? Find it way back in there now. Well, while I'm looking for that, Mark Brown also had his hand up at one point.
Yeah, thanks, Lauren. And yeah, when I raised my hand, it was to actually pick up on a comment that Laura had made in the chat, and it was related, I think, at the time, Mark, when you were discussing the derailment simulation and training exercise in the field. It sounded like that was in a setting that was, for purposes of probably thinking about containment with the creek, and obviously in the corridor here in Kenilworth, we would be thinking, more density urban environment. And the question I was just going to ask is, what is the level of coordination with the local fire? Chief Tyner was just talking, but fire and emergency management in Minneapolis on kind of ongoing coordination of that same kind of idea of simulating or tabletop exercises of how the incident response would play out. What are the considerations for the Minneapolis, section of the rail in that scenario? And is that something that's actively ongoing year over year?
Yeah, I think it would be helpful to have a refresher with the Minneapolis Fire Department. We did that, I think, 2 years ago. It did primarily establish who was in charge of the command center, and how is everybody coordinating and all that kind of stuff. And then also saying, here's what we have to offer. Here's our experts, da, 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 da. But ultimately, I believe it would be the Minneapolis, excuse me, would assume the role of the command center. And we would simply be coordinating with them on the rail side of things, but they would be in charge of the whole event.
Okay. So it sounds like that's something that was done a couple of years ago, and it may be worth revisiting among the agencies.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
So, Mark, I could offer that we have a fire life safety and security group that includes the city, includes the railroad, TC&W. BNSF doesn't necessarily participate in that, but we could maybe use that as an avenue to try to get something going. We just start that conversation.
Yeah, and our TC&W safety manager participates regularly in that meeting, so I will coordinate with him as well to ensure that hits that meeting.
Thank you both.
Right. Representative Hornstein, did you want to speak to the comment you put in the chat about state resources?
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Yes, in the 2021 Omnibus Transportation Bill, and I want to give Claire Rubeck a shout out because she testified for legislation where there is $1 million pot of money that's potentially available, not all the entire $1 million, but a portion of that is potentially available to the city through a grant program through the Department of Public Safety to do the kind of drill that people are talking about today. It's not something that can just happen. It takes planning and resources. And so, there's a very clear directive here, I think, coming out of this meeting that we try to pursue this. So ahead of the meeting, I even started talking with Lauren about, how and what the protocols might be for the city to apply for that money. So there are resources available. It's very, very clear from this meeting that there's a need. I think that Claire and I put forward this legislation, really with this in mind. So it's really good to hear people's concerns, and we'll pursue that.
Thank you, Representative. And then
I would
Evelyn,
think Claire and I with the community.
Claire, right, and thank you as always for your advocacy for us at the legislature. Evelyn, did you want to articulate your question from the chat at all? See if
I think it's pretty cool. Just read it.
Lauren, maybe I could, since that's directed toward me. I wasn't quite clear, Evelyn. When I talked about the freight tracks going back to its original location, we moved at Cedar Shores. We moved the track about 4 feet to the west, and I think at Cedar Lake Parkway, it currently is about 1 foot away from its permanent location. So those are the kind of dimensions we're talking about as far as putting it back to where it was. Does that help you?
It does, although I would say that moving it 1 foot is not going to, it was moved something like 10 feet, but maybe you're meaning, I don't know whatever, it will be where it is. It's just, I hope that when the road's reconstructed there, that there's consideration of all the traffic mess with the bicycle mess there. And I'm hoping there can be some cooperation between the park board and the city and Met Council folks to do something that looks good and is safe, because it's a mess trying to make a right turn on Burnham in the summertime with all those bikes who never stop.
Well, I'll just say that we do coordinate with the park board and the city, and we will continue to do so. There is a plan once this is all done that has already gone through the approval process that will be implemented once we're finished. And essentially, you will have that trail there on where it is today. Well, not right today, but before we took the parkway, closed that, we had the trail on that north or east side that's going to remain.
Thank you. I just want to acknowledge in the chat, Councilmember Goodman made a comment about pursuing the funding opportunity that Representative Hornstein was talking about, and she indicated that she will follow up on that matter. Did I lose track of anyone in this process that was waiting to speak to a question they had? And Chair Cedarberg, I know there was a variety of questions that you had on behalf of the residents of Cedar Isles neighborhood. So if you have more, and then Scott, were you? I thought maybe you were gesturing, but
I don't have any further questions, Lauren. Thank you to Lisa and Frank. We'll follow up on the training. Would love to get that on the books for this year. But appreciate everybody taking the time this evening and answering our questions, and looking forward to this being done safely. So thank you.
Anyone else have questions that I may have missed, or additional questions as we're wrapping up here? Go ahead, Jeremy.
Jeremy, you're muted.
I'm sorry, this Teams works different than Zoom and others. you talk about the rail will be moved back to its final location, but you can't do that till the tunnel is done over that stretch, the sheets cut off, the grade restored, top backfilled and everything. You can't, but that's not all going to be done when you reopen the parkway, right?
That is correct. Yeah, we will still have, and essentially where the track is today, it'll be there once we open the parkway, and at the point where we get the tunnel done, then we will move the track back.
Okay, so there will be yet another shorter term closure of the parkway to accomplish that rail work.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
See that Director Lane from Department of Emergency Management acknowledges he's going to follow up on the issues raised about the drill. Thank you for that. And Mary, did you have an additional question? You're on mute,
Mary.
Mary, you're muted.
Sorry, Mark, I wanted to know what you learned from that drill. Were there important takeaways from the drill that you had? And then my second question would be to Jim Alexander regarding these methods of, I forget what you call them, where you measure the ground to see if it's moving and so forth. Is that a technology that the Met Council has used in the past, or is that new to you?
Well, it's not, it's really a simple technology. We haven't used this on this project. We implemented it as a result of the incident last year because we had frost and we were all concerned about remember, I was talking about that bridging of the frozen layer, and it's not frozen below, and this will allow us to detect. And it's not really anything that's like brand new science out there. It's a very conventional, there's a rebar that goes down on the ground. But it's not the only thing we're using. We also have the instrumentation on the ties, and we're also looking at the inside in the excavation and underwater in the sheets to see if there's any issues, any gaps. And so it's a combination of all these things. We're really trying to keep a close eye so we don't have this issue, because it's not only a safety issue, but it caused us delay in resuming the work because we had to figure out a plan for this winter. So.
Right.
So sorry, Mark, I didn't mean to bump into your answer there, but.
Oh, that's all right. Yeah, I mean, there were a lot of little things like, effective communication. We have an operations coordination desk, the phone trees, things like that. But all in all, it went very well. And the contractors, like with the booms and all that, coordinated very well with the local emergency response people. They all spoke the same language. And so, overall, I think it went very well. There was just a few, protocols or did you call the right phone tree in the right order, things like that. So little things like that were learned so that, and the other thing I thought was great is we were able to share that we have 6 operations coordinators who person a desk 24/7, 365. And so what this also did is any one of those 6 now will know exactly what to do. And having that confidence was a result of having this event. So that was very good.
So communication is essential.
Oh, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. And unpredictable, pointing again to the importance of a local drill because the context would be entirely different. Thank you.
All right, so we have another question in the chat. Before I move to that, is there anybody on the phone that has been wanting to speak and has not had a chance yet? Anyone joining by phone? All right. So the question in the chat, and I don't know if this person is able to speak to this or not, the question was, you said the city will be the command center for incident response. Can you give us more info on what their specific plans are? I think that might be a question for potentially for Chief Tyner in terms of what it means to have incident response.
Yeah, I can speak to this a little bit. I actually did a presentation on this very question last year. And the answer is there's no specific plan because we plan to respond, but beyond that, what we do and what we're going to ask you to do is really dependent upon what the emergency is, what hazard is involved. We're talking about rail safety, so if there's a rail crash or a rail derailment, it is really dependent upon is there a product on the rail? What's the hazard of that product? What's the wind direction? What's the topography? It's a lot of things involved. So without being able to identify the exact danger, then that really determines what our specific plans are. So we may ask you to just shelter in place. We may ask you to evacuate. We're already talking about doing an evacuation drill. So this is something I could probably cover, more in depth at that time. But, the short answer is it depends. It depends on what the incident is and how it presents. And I know that's not the answer you're looking for, but that's really as specific as I can get without the particulars of a given incident.
Right, we're winding down, but Jeremy, did you add this question to the chat, and did you want to, since I last asked you, and did you want to ask that question? Oh, you're on mute.
Are you talking to me? I'm not sure I have another.
Oh, okay, that was probably, I was just checking if that was addressed. I
was going to reiterate what Mark said about you can gauge the speed of the train with, not, 3-digit accuracy, but now he talks about measuring the time between a known distance. And if you don't have that, most of these covered hopper cars have a length of 60 or 65 feet. So if you count 4 seconds from, coupler to coupler, that's pretty close to 10 miles an hour. And that's how I do it, because that's all I can see is the cars. I don't have a 14.66 distance marked out 200 feet out my backyard. But if somebody was going 15 miles an hour along there, it would be really obvious, just because it would take 3 seconds instead of 4 seconds or something like that per car. Now the locomotives are different and there are shorter cars, but you learn that there's pretty close to 60 or 65 feet for the covered hopper cars, depending on whose they are.
Thank you for that. Well, is there anybody I missed that has indicated they have a question or comment? All right, so once again, I just want to thank everyone for being here, from the community, for our speakers, and for a lot of our elected officials who wanted to hear this important conversation. And there's obviously a lot of follow-up to do, but thank you all for participating in this discussion, and have a good night.